Hello, hi everyone, and welcome to Aquarian Radio at aquarianradio.com. I am your host, Janet Kerr-Lesson, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lesson. And today we have a very special episode of Alien Contact Organization with Harry Drew, who is a researcher, and he now has a new documentary and book on the Kingman UFO Story, which brings together information and images never previously revealed. And I can't get his bio to pull up right now, so I'm going to pull on Harry Drew and have him tell us about himself because my computer's not cooperating. Okay, wait, here it is. Let's see. Harry Drew resides in Arizona and is highly regarded for his professional ethic, impeccable credentials, and trusted results as an old-fashioned Indiana Jones type of researcher who takes his fieldwork seriously and has an uncanny ability to ferret out the truth no matter how it's been distorted. Drew is a cultural resource specialist in ancient civilizations, a former director and curator of museums of history, anthropology and archeology, as well as being a newspaper columnist and author of history for the past 40 years. Drew is also an experienced documentarian with expertise in visual media, photography, television, and film production, and in the field of fine arts. And you can find out more about Harry on our website, aquarianradio.com, and the link is on today's program on Blog Talk Radio. You can go to the episode information and find the link to go through to the website. Okay, before I bring on Harry, Dr. Lesson, would you like to say anything to our listeners?
Yeah, this is a chance for you to examine clear, unambiguous evidence that will cast away any doubts that live aliens have been seen by many people, and you don't need the government to tell you. Just listen to Harry and look at what we put up on and what he has on his site, and that's the end of the discussion. The bigger picture is the government's been lying and lying and lying, and Harry proves it. So tell him, Harry.
Let me put you, okay, whoops, I did the other way around. Harry, are you with us? Do I still have you?
I am. Yes, hello.
Oh,
that all sounds pretty scary.
I'm going to hide in bed, yes.
I am, yeah. Hey, you know, it's actually true. There were living crew members, and that's been one of the hardest things for me to convey on. That first came to me from the elderly last surviving member of the U.S. Air Force retrieval team, who told me a story that was much different than I had heard from other places, of course, but it was just part of my research, and I'm doing an interview with this gentleman who has since passed away, actually 4 years ago, last week. He mentioned to me something that was just extraordinary, and I'd already been doing serious research in museum libraries, research facilities, and places of higher learning, government agencies like where police maintain some kind of record or the courts maintain records. So you can imagine that from 1953, we're talking Mayberry, USA era from the old show, if anyone can remember that or have ever seen it, that things were simpler and easier, and there was trust in government that was fairly blind, and to some degree it was earned because the government, most of the people in the government kind of limited how far they would stretch things, and so you could go to these records from that period and you're reading pretty much fact. And during the interview with this gentleman, he mentioned to me a landmark, and nobody had ever had a landmark. And I had spent years out in the desert doing fieldwork, looking for the needle that would go in the haystack. And I couldn't find either one, and I found the landmark on a 1912 wagon road. And from an interview that was done by Raymond Fowler, a Massachusetts UFO researcher from 1973, a distinguished gentleman that did excellent work, I was able to use the interview that he did with a man by the name of Arthur Stancil in May of 1973, who was an eyewitness firsthand, touched the craft just exactly like the Air Force man who later was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force and a test pilot. But I used the other man, Arthur Stancil's description and directions to go from the landmark to drive right up to where the craft landed on May 18th, 1953. And so when I saw the landmark, and I'm all by myself doing this stuff out in the middle of nowhere, and I was about ready to have a party because it was like amazing that I actually found this thing out in the desert and the hilly country below what is called the Wallaby Mountain, which is 8,265 feet high, so it's rather stark. It looks like the Rockies sitting up out of the desert floor by Kingman. And so I pulled up and I looked out my Jeep window and I was looking at the field kitchen the Air Force had left and everything else that they left the day they pulled out after retrieving a fully intact, undamaged in any way. I'll tell you what it was. It's a flying saucer. It's like circular, but a UFO, unidentified object, but it isn't because it's sitting on the ground. It made a forced landing. It's not unidentified. And 4 days before that, the retrieval team had already been there. 2 hours after the craft went down, they were flown to Kingman from Nellis Air Force Base, and they went out by truck with 20 military police to cordon off the area. And as they approached the craft sitting on the ground, there were the 4-member crew standing out front with no place to go. The machine won't operate. And they had a brief conversation. All of this stuff is very amazing. The elderly 85-plus-year-old gentleman told me very breathlessly, still, the emotion very intense, they were human. That's how he said it to me. Yeah, just amazed because in 1953, as an example, George Powell's War of the Worlds was released, which did very well at the box office and with recognition for special effects, and it was the H.G. Wells story of Martians landing on Earth that's been retold for all of the last century, I guess just about. And so the retrieval team kind of expected to see something with suckers on its fingers and antenna and 3 eyes and this kind of thing, and it was like that stunned them. And then one of the 4 stepped in front of the other 3. We take that as like the leader or commander, and spoke to them in English. And I asked the gentleman if they spoke or was he, like telepathically receiving it. And he said he really thought they were speaking. He couldn't say with certainty. All he knew is they were telling them some things, and they were saying it in the language that he spoke. And basically, their only concern was that they would go with the Air Force, no resistance. This is important because of what other things I've uncovered in the story that are verifiable, and the public can find that and look at it for themselves. And that's the best kind of proof a historian can give any of the people that are interested in accuracy and in history. And they only asked that they not be separated. They were immediately loaded up in a military vehicle, and they were transported to Groom Lake. They're top secret. They were not left standing around for 4 days waiting for the next lunch call or a taxi cab. They were taken right out of there, the top secret, and the whole place was screened off. Military equipment had to be brought in. Kingman had no military base, contrary to stories that have been told over and over in books and in DVDs and in conferences, that there was no military presence at Kingman, Arizona in 1953. The Air Force, the Army Air Corps base closed. They gutted out the air traffic control tower in June of 1945 and took all of the equipment, including the PIP, the radar screens, that you see in movies where a bogey's flying on it and a green sweeping line goes around and around in a circle. Those were taken out with everything else, and they were put into a pile and destroyed in June of 1945, and the military exited forever in August 1945. And so one of the stories about an Air Force man in the tower who saw a bogey, the UFO of the Kingman craft on radar, and then looked out the window in the night sky to see a flash of light as it crashed 8 years later is impossible, because there weren't any military there anymore. There wasn't any equipment in the tower anymore. It is on the National Register of Historic Sites. It still exists. It's at the Kingman Airport. It's an industrial park there. Yeah, so I mean, it's like basic things that weren't checked out.
Let me ask you a quick question about the aliens. So I just want to. So these are not grays. These are not alien-looking. They are humanoid. Do you have any further description? How tall were they? What color were they?
Oh, sure. I'll give you the description, and I'll tell you first off, so your listeners will know. And they've heard a little bit about who I am. It's kind of overwhelming. It's just I'm just a historian. I have as a former director of museums of history, anthropology, and archaeology, and all of those things that means. I've seen a lot of things that you read about, and in fact have written many of the things you read about in regard to historic things. And so accuracy is very important to us. And so I wanted to be certain that when the listener heard me speaking, I'm talking to you about as told to me, what the witness told me, not what I decided to tell you, so that we keep the history straight. And what I was told is that after recovering from the very idea that these were human-looking, they were described to me as follows. They were roughly, to a man about 6 feet high. The alien, or the ET, whichever you care to use, was approximately 4.5 to 5 feet high, all four. They were lightly built. They had short, sandy-colored hair. They were wearing... it's interesting. They were wearing jumpsuits. They weren't chrome-plated and a lot of gizmos hanging out of it. They're like coveralls, like working uniforms, later described by someone else who had seen them, who referred to them as coveralls, because that was the only thing relevant in their thinking then in 1953, that it resembled kind of like coveralls with shirt sleeves, and that's basically it. And they would blend into the population quite well. The differences were subtle. The differences mainly, if you looked at them face on, is that the eyes were slightly further apart than what you would see in the general population, but we do see eyes set further apart from like the bridge of the nose. And the jaw to chin area was more like the heart of a Valentine than squared off to more like what we see in the general population. But we do see the more pointed chin as well. So that means that walking down the street, they could blend in pretty well. And the only thing that ever came to me, and now this is my observation, not the witness. And as I listened to this, what impressed me was this sounded like maybe how some people I've seen here in our time who are and have claimed to be hybrids, and if you follow what I'm saying. But none of the big eyes like the grays that are discussed, or reptilian, and they weren't the tall, Aryan-looking blondes and all of that. These were just relatively short, and not even a distinguishing feature as to sexual or what sex they were, male, female, or gender. It was just they all looked the same pretty much.
They were kind of androgynous. Were they androgynous? I'm sorry. Were they androgynous? Is that what you're saying? They were kind of androgynous?
You're breaking up. Were they what again?
Androgynous. You couldn't really, like you were saying, you couldn't tell their sex. It wasn't on the surface what sex they were. You couldn't.
There was nothing to distinguish that there were any female crew members.
Okay. And did they have did they convey their story to anyone about who they were?
No.
Did they have a name for their?
No, they did not. They were removed from the scene and handed off to whoever would do that. They were taken to Groom Lake, and there was compartmentalization then, just as there is now, and there was no need for the retrieval team to know any details if there were any living crew members as far as who they are, where they come from, what they want, all these things. I can tell you what I was told in regard to, because this is the first craft, we're talking for 1953, May 18th. There were 2 more craft that did not successfully make a forced landing, and they crashed. The next one happened 4 days later. That happened on the 22nd of May 1953, and then 2 days after that, another one right smack in front of everybody in Old Town, 3,400 people, Kingman, Arizona, right in front of everybody, and set the Wallapai Mountain on fire, major fire, and all the things that went on with those other 2 things are remarkable, and but it does bring out more aliens and 4 ultimately deceased ones, 2 that were recovered and taken on from Nellis, where 2 had died from what is called the Red Lake Futank UFO crash on 22 May 1953, and the 2 who were injured were checked out and taken on to Groom Lake, which gave Groom Lake the facility there, which had gone to Edwards Air Force Base in let me see here, get my dates straight, 1951, and they took it as an annex to Edwards and began development of that immediately with black budget money. And so it was pretty well set up by 1953 to receive these types of things, meaning UFOs, discs, flying discs, and the crews. And so they were taken there, and that meant there were 6 living ETs at Groom Lake at that point on the 22nd. And the 2 who received serious lower extremity damage in the crash died at the medical facility in Nellis. So there were 2 bodies, and then 2 were killed in a crash 2 days later on 24 May 1953, and were drug away with parts of the wreckage above the fire that had started until the Air Force had to disengage because the fire was growing so fast. They were threatened. Their safety was threatened to even be there, and they end up getting trapped and then dying of fire. While on the other side of the fire, lower down the mountain, the fire crews were busy working, and there's a very creepy science fiction story, and it's the last thing I found out, and it almost made me a disbeliever because it was too strange, and it was about the 2 living crew members that had gone down the hill instead of, they were in good enough shape to go down the hill and away from the crash, and of course if they'd stayed they would have been probably trapped in the fire, just like the Air Force having to get out and had vehicles to do that. But and what happened after that is extraordinary. It's documented. Some of it is on the front page of the newspaper.
Wow.
And and if I back up from the 18th for the craft that's sitting at the place where it made the forced landing, it is the Kingman UFO. It's more than that. It's actually the UFO that is the basis for the entire Area 51 UFO story. That's the one they took there, and they took it intact. And I know which way they took it out of here, and they did not use Highway 40 as one of the leading other people have mentioned, where they took Highway 40 going west to go to Nevada 95. And the problems with that, and I give this to my audiences, and when I speak at different places, and it's the problem with some of these things is people can go check this out for themselves, and like using a sixth grade girl and boy with the aid of a teacher and parents' permission, have them pick out the discrepancies on a 1953 map and a 2013-2014 map of the differences, and then tell them a story about this UFO being taken down the highway and then closing Highway 40 off from Kingman to Barstow, California. That's about 240 miles for several days to move the UFO down it, to take it over to Nevada Highway 95, which would go straight up through today's what we call Henderson, and on up to Groom Lake. And the problem with that was that in 1940, Highway 40 in 1953 didn't exist, and it wouldn't be built for 31 years. And so it's a little hard to do that, and they would have needed a bridge over the Colorado.
Let me slow you down here, because you got a lot of information. It's powerful. It's making my head spin. Okay, so I wanted to go back a little bit. So you're saying that they had a system in place by 53, so to take care of all these crashes. So there's a lot of crashes and ships coming down. Do you have any idea what's going on there? Are we bringing them down? Are they them? Yep. What's your ideas on that?
The rest of that story, so it makes the listener have a better grasp of why all of these things are happening, is all three of the craft that I mentioned, in part, were headed from the north, flying to the south, straight towards what was described to me as an underground base. And that's why, first off, why they were here. And during that particular period of time, 1953, we just concluded a shaky armistice with the North Korean government in regard to the Korean War, and there's no end to that. It's just it's basically in a hold mode even now. And in 1949, just before that, the Soviet Union detonated its first nuclear weapon. And so by 1953, our military was already aware that the Soviet Union, this is the height of the Cold War, was in fact building a long-range bomber that could carry nuclear weapons and use the bombers in a polar flight to come down over the pole to bomb the United States. You know, this is whether they really were going to do that or not, who knows? But that was the concept, and certainly there'd just been a shooting war in Korea, and so that's everybody's nervous about that because we are blind in 1953 radar-wise. On the ground, radar had a range of 25 miles. And if you're trying to watch a bomber coming over the pole, to be able to do anything about responding to stop them or warn the people or do anything, 25-mile range is too late. And so there was an effort to develop a powerful radar system that could see further. In the meantime, while back east in the United States, the concept, the early forerunner of backscatter radar, that type of thing was under development. And in the interim, so we had something like a stopgap between what we'll get and what we had. We started developing experimental overpowered radar systems and set up in a triangular situation, and that was done here. And one of the sites, Radar Hill in Old Town Kingman, still exists, and some of the same buildings from the era are still there from that time. But the other radar systems were out, set up. One set up in what is
radar.
Go ahead.
Let me ask you a question about the radar, because that was very important. You just said that we didn't have radar that extended beyond 25 miles, so we were toast. What happened, historically, that we advanced our radar so now we could detect it further?
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you. Did you ask me who made a decision?
No, you're saying that back in those days, our radar was only effective for 25 miles. Do you know when we got better radar? What was the circumstances? What happened that our radar, was that part of alien technology? Was that human technology? Because that seemed to be critical for this whole era, what was happening with war.
Well, the first thing you have to do when you think about any of this, the first thing you have to do is you have to leave 2014 in the way you think and the way you look at things, and you have to go back to 1953. And in 1953, we were using U.S. Army World War II surplus items to fight the Korean War. We hadn't really had all that much time to develop a complete new weapons system for everything we would do, and we were actually somewhat at comfort of having beaten the Axis powers, so we didn't go even full bore in the development of jets. We were doing it, but the urgency had been diminished by the fact that the Axis powers had been destroyed. And so we were in a rebuild mode with them to help them build democracies, and multiple countries that were part of the Allied force, which included the Soviet Union, were part of those that overlooked those things. But radar, the urgency of developing radar slowed down with the end of World War II, because like everything else, there was a huge amount of debt incurred fighting a world war where about 120 to 140 million people died. And so in 1953, after having just expended a lot of young men and material and wealth on our first real political thing after World War II, which is the Korean War, we began to see things in a different perspective than we had. We were always isolated by oceans, and the development of the Bear long-range bomber by the Soviet Union changed the dynamics of how we could be defended. Our radar was essentially on the ground, 25 miles. If you wanted to increase the distance, you want to double the distance, you double the power. It was very simplistic. In fact, the things they were doing, their goal was to increase range, and they never bothered much thought on what any of the ramifications would be as you increase the use and power of short pulse microwave radiation. And the radar systems that they had here that were had some operators trying to keep there were no frequency locks. They were trying to keep the frequencies fairly stable, and they would sit and operate an oscilloscope and watch what's going on. And then you had the a couple tech people for each unit who were doing adding another microwave, literally bolting them one next to another one like a rail gun, and then hooking the whole thing together. And when they snapped them on, they had put them all right smack over what is the UFO flyway. And the craft that went down here were terrestrial craft. They were not interstellar. They were like jets that fly and land on an aircraft carrier, or jets that can fly on a carrier but also can also land on a land base. And they had an underground base. This is what I have gotten from my interviews. That put them down at the other end of this. The first one that went down was watched by 15 residents. It went 7.62 miles from where it ran into where the triangle was. The Air Force, without understanding the whole concept, they had no way to even measure what they were doing, because 3 different radar overpowered. they were trying to achieve 150-mile range. That's a 24-time increase instead of like, you know, a much smaller number. So there could be flying parts. Wouldn't surprise me. But the side lobe leakage and the rear lobe leakage off the radar was more than enough to kill all the people that were running this stuff. Locals complained about flocks of birds being knocked right out of the air when they flew into this area. It was a forerunner, without him knowing, of HAARP. They were creating a massive powered triangle, and triangle is not all that exceptional because it helped them triangulate on things, but they were getting this massive energy in the center. They had no way to measure it. They didn't even realize that it was happening. They were just trying to get to 150-mile range. That's it. On water, by the way, the same radar would give them 45 miles.
So you're saying this radar system is what was bringing down these craft, and these craft were terrestrial, not extraterrestrial. Are they from the? First of all, is that true that radar brought down like the Roswell craft, or what was going on? Was it lightning? There's all these different stories. That's one question. And then secondly, these were terrestrial craft. Are these people from the Hollow Earth? Is the Hollow Earth story true?
Oh, you're asking me the last question. You said, "Are these people what?"
Are they from the Hollow Earth? Are they from under the Earth? Is there a civilization? Is the Hollow Earth theory true? Is this a civilization from under our own Earth until the terrestrial? They're not extraterrestrial. That's one question.
Are they from the Hollow Earth? I can't go there. I'm a professional historian who interviewed witnesses, and the witnesses tell me the military side of it, and the man who was essentially what we would call the bomb blast effects analyst at Frenchman Flats for Upshot Knothole, the atomic bomb test, who put his hand on this thing and looked at it and tried to determine the rate of fall and forward speed of impact. None of them were in a position to be briefed on anything about the crew once they were removed from the area. That's just, and the people who received the crew wouldn't be given the details of everything going on at the site. They're irrelevant, so they're going to interview them about. Go ahead.
The vector of the crashes would show you where the underground base destination was then.
The underground base is a place located south of where the landing site is, the first one. And that's like, for whatever purpose they were using it for, I do not know. That was their destination for whatever reason. Whatever reason you take your jet and land on the aircraft carrier, that would be part of it. I don't know if they need refueling. I don't know if they came from some hollow place on Earth. And we get off of topic here. It's like I have friends who have watched UFOs come right out of the side of Mount Shasta. That's their story, okay? And I would think, oh, yeah, you're right. But I was in southern Oregon, south central Oregon, up on a hillside, and watched one come up in the night from Mount Shasta in the moonlight. And as it came, it lit up the ground for miles all around in front of it as it came. And it went right by me at the same elevation I was on the side of a mountain, And so this is years before. Has nothing whatsoever to do with the Kingman UFO events. These are the 1950s. The technology of the craft used was that there was no need to be operating hardened scout ships, shuttles, when they were basically dealing with a civilization just barely out of bearskins and flint knives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
and I can tell you, go ahead.
All the stories you're getting, if you have an idea of who these people are, since they are humanoid, and so from what I gathered, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sorry if I'm getting things not quite 100%, so that's why I'm attempting to clarify. I'm acting on behalf of myself and the listeners, right? So these people, they're humans, and they could pass as humans. Do you have any idea, based on all the information you've gathered, who they are? Are they terrestrial, extraterrestrial? How did they come to be? Are they Nazis? What's your idea?
I can tell you who they aren't. Okay? More than I can tell you who they are. They were not the Japanese and doing a secret operation or the Nazis. Okay?
And how do you know that?
I mean, there's all kinds of... Well, you'll find that out. Okay. You'll find that out in my new book, and you'll find that out in the documentary that's coming out. Why? Okay. Beyond the simple fact that neither society had much beyond one brick or one board on top of another one by then, because one country had been subjected to continual firebombing and 2 atomic bombs. They didn't have the capacity to build even the hot air balloons to send incendiary bombs over to the Pacific Northwest again. And so to visualize that they were building spacecraft is a stretch beyond anything that I'm willing to accept in the science that I have. I mean, it's just like, it's really simplistic. Anyone listening, think about it. There is a limitation to just how much can be done by any one culture that's been bombed to smithereens by another culture here who are inhabitants of our planet. We have a long history of developing the better weapon, and each time working out a way to defeat that weapon, and then we end up using everything we develop. And that's a phenomenon with man. So it's kind of unlikely that out of the ashes, before they're even out of the ashes, they develop flying saucers and that kind of thing. Just the concept to begin with, you start looking at, they're trying to keep from starving to death, and because they've just had everything in their country destroyed, basically. And sad as it is, we do that.
This is anybody here on the surface of the earth, an existing known culture back in 1953. So these people are not from any existing known culture on the earth, be it American, Japanese, or German or Nazi, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, that's the basic concept, that they were alien, meaning they came here from some other place beyond anything we ever had even suspected, and thus the great surprise to the Air Force retrieval team when they saw what is a seamless circular disc sitting on the ground with no antenna, no holes blown through it, anything. It's perfectly pristine, and 4 crew members standing outside who are completely ready to meet whoever is showing up, because they aren't going to be flying anywhere because their craft wasn't shot down. Something happened from the radar that affected, in our vernacular, or in the way we think about things, especially now, in 1953, it'd be just like almost impossible to come up with some rationale for these things. But today we might say that what happened is the triangular configuration of overpowered radar upset the avionics or the power control systems or some other non-hardened feature within the craft, because they were terrestrial. And their aircraft carrier we refer to as a mothership. And if they were transporting outside the Earth's atmosphere, they would probably need something to be able to do that in, and they fly into something else so they can be taken there, or they move dimensionally. See, I can't tell you these things, and that's the problem. That's the problem. When I say I can't tell you these things, I can tell you anything, but I won't do that. I'm only going to tell you what I know, because I'm talking about history here that's verifiable, backed up with facts, not speculation about anything. In fact, Here's an interesting quotation that was provided to me by internationally known prolific author Steve Bell, who's like author of Secret Revelation, and he wrote for my use, truth is the difference between speculation, and that's what I'm trying to convey. And I don't want this to continue like it has for 30 or 40 years, where the government doesn't have to interfere with the story about Kingman because of all the stories that have been told. It's been self-generating. The latest thing that I'm aware of about the Kingman UFO story now is something available on Amazon, and it's about the crash. It crashed. One alien died. One woman alien ran away. The other aliens that survived the crash had a ray gun fight with the retrieval team until the ray gun power packs went dead, and then they surrendered to the Air Force. Please, let's be real here a little bit. And no, this is without ever interviewing anyone involved. And I've nailed down to where there are 42 witnesses here that watched one of these three events occur, or one or more of these events occur, plus what I call first-hand eyewitnesses who touched these things, and that's pretty important. And the fact that they didn't know each other or meet each other at the time is extraordinary. Two of them were physicists. That's not so bad as far as having some concept of science, and one an Air Force man. And so you take all of that and you think, well, who are they? Well, they're not your neighbor here. And the way we think of neighbors being that they were born down at the county hospital in 1953 or born at home then. And the 1953 Kingman, there's only two roads in and out of Kingman, Arizona in 1953. Highway 93 coming down from Las Vegas direction had just been paved in 1951. It's a two-lane road. It's a twisty old thing because they build them by the mile. If you get a mile that goes back and forth 4 or 5 times, then the road costs more for that mile than if it was just straight. So it isn't all straight, and it's no longer used. It's replaced by a very high-speed 93. But in 1953, it didn't exist that way. It came to Kingman in Route 66, 1938, and then old AZ 93, south out of Kingman, that's the other part of 93, was a dirt-graded road. A grader graded the road to what is called Wickiup, and from Wickiup to Wickenburg, headed towards Phoenix, in 1950 was still a wagon road. No television, one radio station that went on the air in 1949, and the telephones were limited in town. The rest were used a dry-cell battery in an oak box with a speaker in the front of it and a wired earpiece you put to your ear so you could talk to people down the road, and you stayed off in a lightning storm. And I mean, very, very, very different than the iPhones that we pack around with us, and we can talk to anybody in the earth in a second.
Harry, did you talk to anybody who had witnessed what happened to those folks at Spoon Lake? Do you have did you interview anyone that had some of that information? What happened to these guys that were taken captive or guessed?
What happened to the craft?
The people that they took back to the facility. Do you have any reports from the facility about the interaction, or in the jail, for that matter, while they were waiting for the Air Force to pick?
Yeah. My information is they were eventually, not immediately, eventually taken to Los Alamos. Keep in mind, in 1953, the developments going on with Edwards as an annex had already been underway for 2 years. And by 1955, Congress, in the open, budgeted for Area 51. Okay, so I mean, that was kind of like the progression, but it's all secret, and and it's still secret. It's just not going to stop. Los Alamos.
Have you interviewed anybody that told you anything that they saw? And I think I remember you saying something about there was a couple of these guys from one of the craft were housed in a jail for a while and interacted with jail personnel, with the cops in Kingman. Do I got it mixed up, or did that happen?
A couple of what guys are you telling me about? Are we talking about civilians talking with the aliens?
Yeah, one of the crashes, I thought it was in your presentations, you said that they were brought to a place of holding in the city of Kingman itself, and people there saw them interacting with the sheriff or whoever it was.
No, what I talked about was because the military had nothing in Kingman, they had to move equipment. What happened is it's a stroke of luck for everything that happened here, but they had to move equipment from Camp Irwin. Today it's called Fort Irwin, which had become had gone from infantry designation in 1951 to armor. Which was perfect because the heavy lift equipment and like the M25 tank transporter and 38-foot trailer and those things that were needed were able to be loaded on flat cars and shipped by rail and arrived 4 miles southwest of Kingman and offloaded, but they had to drive them through town. There was no way to get to the other side. And so in the night they were driving this and hauling these things through, and this is a little town of 3,400 people, and it didn't escape the local residents notice all this rumbling all night long of military stuff going through. It's very unusual. The sheriff and undersheriff went out on the 19th to the location that I ultimately found, and ultimately to the road prior to where you make a turn to go to where the landing happened. And when the sheriff arrived there were military police blocking the road. And he spent 15 minutes trying to get through to see a commanding officer, and they refused to allow him through. He never kept that a secret, nor did his family, that these things occurred, and he was not allowed to go through. But he didn't talk to any aliens. The aliens are long gone. They were already gone the day before.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Fascinating. I just want to let our audience know that we do have Robert Evans Jr. here. Bob, did you have any questions?
A fantastic.
Are you there, Bob?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can
hear you. Not very well.
Okay. Well,
very poor. You're going to have to relay it to me.
Yeah, a fantastic person on your radio show. Thank you. This gentleman gave me a lot of info as to what happened before Eisenhower and Bishop McIntyre had their secret meeting with the 3 alien races in 1954. So this probably ended up to what's been adding up to the 1954 secret meeting that they had. And this told.
Okay, hold right there. I got to translate. Got to make sure Harry can hear you. Are you? Do you ever understand what he's saying, Harry?
No.
That he's talking about what you're revealing is supporting the 1954 meetings with Eisenhower. Anyway, I'm not sure. Did you have a question, Bob? I can ask Harry because he can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'm not. I'm actually not responding to anything to do with the Eisenhower meeting. This is on this. Yeah, this is the problem. There's too much diluting of the topic, and the changing of how things supposedly went to the point that I'm telling you the disinformation is so bad that the government doesn't have any need to use anything that the Robertson's panel recommended to Central Intelligence, because it's already being done. And that's why there are something like 15 different stories about how this went on without a single shred of evidence that you can hand somebody at anywhere, a conference or on the street, and say, take a look at this. It's like, this is what I was after. This is why I spent 6 years doing research and field work. I'm trying to find out, number one, if there ever was a Kingman UFO crash, because you hear about it, and I live here. I live in the area. And by profession, I started using the normal methodology and protocols of the profession, and I went out and started doing things like checking maps going back to 1856 and come forward, so I get an understanding of where everything is. Not what everybody's saying where it is, but where it really is. And that makes a big difference. It started changing things really quick. And this has led to some people kind of just dropping out talking about the story anymore, because it doesn't make sense to talk about how using Highway 40 in 1953, when Highway 40 wouldn't be built for 31 more years, or crossing bridges that didn't exist, or saying that they checked newspapers in all directions around Kingman for 100 miles, including Las Vegas, and never found one single word about any UFOs here during that time period. And on the 21st day of May, that's the day before the Red Lake crash, and it's basically the day that in the evening the Kingman UFO will be moved out of the area to up to Boulder Dam and barged across the back of the dam. It went up a different way. I know exactly the route they used, but on the day, May 21, 1953, and you remember the craft went down on the 18th. It made a forced landing and wasn't damaged. There were 3 men southeast of the landing site who were unaware there was a UFO landed someplace, and the Air Force men and the military police and the cooks in the field kitchen and all of that had no idea. There were 3 guys southeast of them, and the 3 men were out looking at some things for a fishing derby for kids, and one of them was a former fighter pilot who was contracted with the United States Air Force to train fighter pilots at 3 air bases in Arizona. One of them was a businessman and private pilot, and the third man was an editor for the Prescott Daily Courier newspaper. And they stood and watched 8 UFOs, flying discs, one hovering on each end of 6, and the other 6 doing aggressive dogfight maneuvers for over an hour, and that's on the front page of the newspaper. And of course, the aggressive dogfight maneuver, the fighter pilot would certainly know that. These 8 UFOs could see the Kingman craft sitting on the ground visually, and maybe
how did they the radar that was messing up the other ones?
They're southeast of it.
Oh, they're out of the range. I got you.
Yeah. Yes. The radar system. The radar system that downed the craft, was north and west of where the UFO, the Kingman UFO, went down. The Kingman UFO didn't just drop like a rock. It actually, Arthur Stansel's description of its rate of he even questions in an interview he did with Raymond Fowler in 1973, questions his own work in his calculations, because of the rate of fall and forward speed estimates. They base things on impacting by how far the crater is, or how deep the crater is, or how far the craft is in the ground. And this thing was sitting 20 inches into to the ground, and there was no damage, not even a scratch. And that's described by multiple first-hand eyewitnesses. And then some other details that I won't go into here about the features of the craft on the outside. But the rate of fall was estimated. He was trying to estimate it based on what he thought was Frenchman Flats. He couldn't see what he was doing because it was nighttime, a quarter moon, and this was the evening of the 21st. A bus of 40 scientists and specialists was taken from Phoenix, Arizona, and driven out across that graded road where they're changing the wagon road into what would be a Como road, and went to the landing site to inspect the craft. This is not an experimental super secret airplane that they were told it was. Well, they had taken them to a hangar, and so they're like a long way from Phoenix, and they're from all different places. This one witness he was flown out of what was then called Indian Springs Air Force Base in Nevada. They boarded a General Motors 3301 military bus, 840 made. The driver's name was Dennis. It's just like, and they drive out there and they see all this stuff, and that's in the evening of the same day that the three witnesses saw it, and it's all downstream, so to speak, from the radar triangle. And I can tell you that the operators, they didn't sit out there all night long and run stuff. They ran it at different times of the day. They were testing it. They're trying to find a way to extend the range, and this wasn't like a permanent operating system. These were experimental radar, and they were doing the best they could, and replacing two-powered stuff that was burning out. The usual kind of thing that happens when you start boosting your power supplies.
Listen, after the crashes, when they knew that they were, the drivers must have conveyed to them that their machines were messed up because of the radar. Did they alter the radar, and did that create a safe line for the aliens again, if the aliens they were? Are you asking me if the radar did anything to the aliens?
Oh,
I'm saying, did they turn off the radar that was messing up the aliens, or how soon did the aliens adapt their craft to the radar that was messing them up?
If you're asking me if I'm really not positive, I missed something there, but I'll try to address it the best I can from the way I'm understanding it. The aliens didn't have a clue what had happened, okay? And I'll tell in an audience in Tarquinia, Italy last year, only one question came from the audience where there was disbelief that low-powered things, electronic devices, can cause any kind of a problem for anything that flies, and I was suggesting that you're talking about something where like 5 people are sitting on a commercial 737 aircraft, and they have their cell phones on. They're not on the phones, they're just on. And all of a sudden, the automatic pilot disengages. There's no alarm. The pilot could be in the back getting coffee, and the co-pilot looking at a book while the plane's flying on autopilot. No alarm. The plane begins to descend, or suddenly snap rolls and goes down or something, and they've got an emergency. And so a gentleman in the audience at Tarquinia had a conflict with the idea that cell phones could possibly do anything to the avionics of a commercial jet. And the FAA renewed no cell phone use or having cell phones on in commercial aircraft in the United States, and that kind of follows along with everything else. And it's so stringent that on the 23rd day of June 2013, a woman on I think it was a U.S. Air, or it was an American Airlines company. I won't name the company, I guess. But She refused to turn her cell phone off before they took off. She was arrested and removed. And you can look that up for yourself. Yeah. So because tests have shown the possibility that just cell phones being on, we're not talking laptops or anything else. We're talking just plain cell phones. They sit and transmit all the time, basically. That's why they can track your location and this type of thing. And this is, I'm not talking iPhones. I'm just talking a regular cell phone. And tests have shown, or at least suggest, that in a commercial jet, like a 737, and Lord help somebody on a 747 with 400 people, that all of a sudden you can have aileron changes, landing gear deploy or retract. Different things in the avionics get upset. And when they make an announcement once or twice aboard the plane while in flight to have them shut off, when that happens, the problem disappears. So 2 and 2 will equal 4 for the flight crew, and they're pleased when that happens, and I would be too. I don't like to fly in a plane where somebody's doing a lot of things with electronic gadgets for that very reason. But we're talking about something obviously far more powerful than a cell phone or 5 little cell phones, which is, and I could understand the man's questioning that at a conference in Italy, that could happen. And so what you have is atmospheric, terrestrial type of craft being used by an alien flight crew. They're flying along on a route they have flown multiple times to an underground base. It's not an issue. We see UFOs here in my area frequently, and going the same course even. And in fact, there's been an increase for myself personally and someone who worked with me on this project in the field, where we've seen some things we've never seen before at our house. So, and it's like I'm kind of really not going there either, but it's all happened since discovering the landing site, which was, by the way, left the way I found it. It's what is called in situ. It's exactly like I arrived the day after the Air Force left. What they left is there. It's an archaeological site, and the things they left. There's a very special, one of the things they left is a very special datable thing, and it's perfect as far as dating the site, and military contract only, made 2 years, 1951 and 52, and there it is in the hundreds. And so that kind of a thing, and that's just one more indication of something happening. But these craft were affected because they flew into something that they weren't hardened against. That's my estimation. And like we do when we have some type of problem with an aircraft or something, we ground it and we work with it and look at the systems to try to determine what it is that's causing the disruption or the danger or a crash that happened until we find it, and then we fix it, and then we reauthorize the aircraft to fly again. After this happened here, not long after this happened here, there were no more. So it's like you find out what it is, and so you switch on a switch in the control panel of the flying disc, and it's an anti-jamming device or something, and no more problem. I mean, I have no idea what happened, but there were no more.
Rapid. It was soon afterwards they corrected it. It was soon.
Yeah, and but that's what we do. So if they're that far ahead of us in 1953, why would we think that they couldn't do the same thing that we've been able to accomplish now? And as we determine the cause of what causes a crash and a system failure or some other thing, and we fix it, and then like the Osprey that can take off straight up, and then the engines swing over and it flies away like a plane. it was having all kinds of problems, and they worked them out. We're using them every day in the military. So.
Oh. Harry, there's a couple questions. Bob, first of all, 650 Bob, did you have a question for Harry?
Yes, Harry, can you hear me at all right now? Harry.
Ask the question, and then I'll ask him, because he can't hear you, Bob. Okay, what's your question?
Okay, Harry, the 3 ships that crashed around Roswell all crashed because we were using a brand new type of radar. And that's the same type of radar that Eisenhower had turned off when he went to Holloman Air Force Base back in 1955, where he met with the Anunnaki himself.
Right, but
have you ever heard this?
Okay, what Bob is saying that go slower. The three crashes in Roswell had a radar system which was here. Let me see your question. Did you put it in the chat? Hold on 1 second.
Janet, what he's saying is that Eisenhower's handlers were aware of the danger of the radar, and so they turned it off so that I could meet with the aliens without endangering their craft. I think that's what Bob's saying.
The story.
Yes.
So what's your question, Bob? Is there a question for...
Yeah, didn't hear it.
Are you aware of that? Okay. Did you understand what we're asking, Harry?
Well, I guess I'm trying to figure out exactly which part of that was the question, but what I can tell you is that it's like I have a copy of an internal memo that was from one Air Force officer and department to another in the Pentagon from that time, and it asks this very interesting question. It says, do you suppose that it's our radar that's causing these UFOs to go down?
Ooh. It's
a question, okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's a question, and it's like I don't know a lot about Roswell because I was more. First off, what I ever heard about Roswell, there was a crash in 1947, July 2nd, 1947, and there is a debris field of 1 square mile of pieces about the size of the palm of your hand, and they found 4 intact bodies, and the Air Force said it was a flying saucer, and then the next day it doesn't. I can tell you the following things. Nobody here, even in 1953, knew anything about Roswell. Okay? Nobody here knew about the 8 UFOs being launched that was talked about on the front page of the Prescott Daily Courier published on May 22nd, 1953, talking about what happened on May 21, the day before, when the bus with the scientists came later that day. Nobody knew a thing about it because communications were zero, basically. And I can also tell you that, coincidentally or not, 5 days after that July 2nd, 5 days after the first 1947 Roswell crash, 2 businessmen are flying from Las Vegas to the Kingman Airport, not the Army Air Base, it's long gone. And 1947, it's already the Kingman Air Base, or Kingman Airport. And as they were making an approach at approximately 500 feet off the ground in a Cherokee type of aircraft, they're set upon by multiple flying discs, UFOs, to the point that the air-to-ground, ground-to-air discussion going on from the Radio Shack, because the tower is no longer used, is that the 2 business people in this private plane trying to land are terrified they're about to be killed. They think they're going to get rammed by, flying saucers. 5 days after Roswell. Nobody here knows anything about Roswell. Nobody over in there were only 3 newspapers, by the way, So the big research as far as checking newspapers in 100 miles around every direction, there was only 3. 2 besides Kingman's, one in Needles, California, and the other at Prescott, Arizona, and which is south and east of Kingman. And so the communication between them was limited to non-existent. The next day, after the 5 days after Roswell with the thing happening at Kingman, the next day, Prescott was overwhelmed by the number of flying discs being sighted there. And that's right on the front page of their paper, and the one at Kingman's right on the front page of the Kingman newspaper. All you have to do is go to the newspaper morgue and turn pages one at a time for every day that went by from 1950, or in my case, 1945, on up. And I say 50 because there was another crash here 1 mile from the one that happened on May 24, 1953, on the side of the Wallapai, and almost a repeat. 1 mile away, started a big forest fire. I will add, to give everybody an idea of how spooky this gets, and it's almost like science fiction, on May 24, 1953, in front of all of the people in Old Town Kingman, they watched a flying disc crash into the side of the mountain and set it on fire. Stories about it was caused by a lightning storm, and I listened to a man on stage in 2008 talking about this being an electric thing, meaning a lightning. The weather was perfect the entire week. There was no lightning storm. And the Air Force still has a retrieval team here. About the time they're going to leave, there's another thing happened, and this was fortunate for them in some ways, and I guess maybe in part what happened at the end for the history part, it's fortunate for us because there's more records about aliens here, and that is that while dragging away 2 deceased aliens and rubble from where this disc hit, 2 of the crew had gone down away from the flames of the forest fire and were seen by a Forest Service worker who had been bringing supplies up to volunteers to try to fight this fire, which was front page news for a couple of weeks because 1953 technology was a big tub full of water and gunny sacks, wet gunny sacks to beat burning grass, and shovels for dirt to throw on a bulldozer to try to cut fire trails. And the most sophisticated thing they had in 1953 was a brass tank with arm straps you put on your back with a hand pump to squirt water like a water gun. Okay, and there was no way to get fire trucks there, and because it's up on a really rough country of the side of this mountain, and so the Forest Service worker looks at these 2 individuals, and they're kind of wandering around disoriented and like they're lost or something, and he begins to suspect that they may be arsons because the fire has no reason to have started that he knew of because he hadn't heard about any discs or anything else coming down. So he took them into custody and drove them into Kingman to the 1914 Mojave County Courthouse, and they were taken to the sheriff's office, which is in the northwest corner of the basement of the courthouse, which is all poured in place, steel reinforced concrete. And the sheriff's office had 2 detention rooms, which were literally, and are still, because it still exists, concrete vaults with one way in out. There are no other openings. They are below grade, meaning below the surface of the outside ground. The sheriff was not in. This is small Kingman, and so there were 4 deputies there. 1 deputy was sent out to get the sheriff. While all this is going on, back up on the mountain, the reporter for the Kingman Daily Miner newspaper who's covering the fire sees the Forest Service worker apprehend these two individuals who seem to be lost and aimlessly, maybe a little rummy, wandering around, and he writes down in his pad, which will later be on the front page of the paper, that the Forest Service worker took into custody two, this is quote, two strange-looking men, unquote, and they're wearing what looked like coveralls, and they're crew members from the craft, and they're taken down, and when a deputy is sent out, 3 deputies remain. They lock the 2 aliens in a concrete vault with one door locked. The Forest Service worker sits down on an oak bench by the door. This is inside the sheriff's office that you can only reach through 2 separate doors that are locked independently of each other. 3 deputies are there watching. The newspaper man followed the Forest Service worker. He's outside the window you can talk through to the old sheriff's office in 1953, and he's trying to talk some information out of what's going on, and he can't get it. So he's waiting, like they are, for the sheriff. Sheriff Frank Porter arrives. He's briefed by the Forest Service worker, and he tells the deputy to open up, and they step into the room where the 2 aliens are being held, and they aren't there anymore. And the newspaper reporter is told, and he writes down, and it's in the newspaper, they vanished. And you know what? Law enforcement keeps a record of people they are taking in for interrogation. And these people would not speak to them, and they would not identify themselves being taken down. They said nothing to the Forest Service worker. Okay, they didn't know who they had in more ways than one. Now, that's documented.
Harry, I have somebody that's in the queue and probably wants to ask a question. Let me see if they have a question for you.
Okay.
Area code 804. Do you have a question for Harry? Or are you just listening? 804, are you there? Oh. Hello? All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you for that. I thought I have a question, but they're just listening. Okay, continue. This is fascinating.
Well, I can just sum up that way. What happened in 1950, I don't know the cause of why the craft. See, I'm doing research on the Kingman thing in 1953, and so because I go back to 1945 and 1856 as far as roads, but I go back in time to get a perspective, and then also to get myself thinking how things are in 1953. I can't be doing this kind of work and then using 2014 as a reference point, because you get all fouled up in the way you look at things. And so I have everything from the movies that we're showing in the theater here and this type of thing. And speaking of movies, one of the witnesses, Arthur Stancil, who had a pseudonym for his name being used when it was first done in a report of 65 pages. And I have a copy of that report done in 1978, which is annotated by the county historian who discussed some questions he had with the researcher Raymond Fowler, who did the interview, a 65-page interview with Arthur Stancil, who was a physicist, a mathematician, and an engineer who was sent from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He was really sent from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to Upshot Knothole or Frenchman Flat. And he's the one that was examining and trying to come up with the crash speed and thinking he was like on Frenchman Flat with packed desert. And the craft landed in a drain field, a slow drain field off the Wallapai Mountain. And in May, there's water 4 inches below the top of the sand, the surface of the sand. But he couldn't tell because they had 2 large arc lights running on each side of the craft at night. The craft outer skin is like buffed aluminum, not chrome, just like it's a reflective silver color, and seamless. and it made it blinding with the lights on the craft. It was blinding to see out into the dark. He had no idea that he was on a very gentle slope where the mountain met the desert, where they come together. And I've been to the site all different seasons to get an idea of what the water table is, did compression tests and porosity tests and a lot of other things on site for several years, so I get some kind of feel for what happens, including being there in the same day, same time frame in the evening that they were, so I get an idea what that's like. And so he was basically blind to looking around and off in the distance behind the craft. The eyes narrow, and so he would have had a different perspective on the impact speed, and he questioned even that when he did the interview with the well-known and highly regarded researcher Raymond Fowler, and you couldn't understand the rate of fall. He was saying was he was getting like 8 feet per second, and normal rate of fall is without power or anything else. If you just take a pencil and drop it, it begins to drop at 32 feet per second, and it just accelerates. That's why we had a man last year break the sound barrier jumping out of a high-altitude balloon. Just kept, yeah. And so, and his questioning that, it turns out he had a right to question it. And by the way, he went on to do a lot of other things, Arthur Stancil, and I think he was taking big risks. He didn't say as much as he said at the time, and I think personally that he began to question how much further he should go with it, because he really was involved with a lot of things that you really shouldn't be talking about this stuff, and not just because it's kooky. Nobody was saying it was kooky. In fact, an official communication out of Washington, D.C. after Roswell and after the denial of Roswell, the craft being real, an official announcement or statement being made later in 1947 coming from Washington, D.C. and the Pentagon, and it was on AP wire, was an admission to the flying discs and their concern about not being able to address it nationwide because they lacked the resources. Whether they understood they were actually acknowledging it, they did that, in literally. And I found out while I was doing research. It's like, whoa. This is after denying the flying saucer was at Roswell.
So their excuse was they lacked the resources, not that they weren't real, they just lacked the resources. Amazing. Well, we're running out of time here. I wanted you to tell our listeners more about your book that's coming up and your documentary, and tell us a little bit about those things.
Very soon. The amount of work that I've done, and I've released some things out on a DVD called Hidden in Plain Sight, and then which is jam full of information about everything we've talked about here pretty much, and then something where I spoke at UFOCon in the Bay Area, and it gives a more personalized presentation on certain points, much like we've done here, and visual, and including quotes from or segments of footage from witnesses, statements, videos, and but what's coming out is 7 days in May, the Kingman UFO Story, and it will be everything that I've already said, with a whole bunch that hasn't been said, that I've kept back and haven't revealed, and the work that I've done in conjunction to what I found, and that includes things like some graphics, the eight flying saucers south and east of where the Kingman craft was sitting, which is the one that became the one for the Area 51 story, and some other statements and witness statements. And like I mentioned at the very beginning, at the Route 66 International Festival, which, by the way, for the magazine, they actually did a story on me, which is the first breakaway to do anything UFO. And they're a very prestigious type of international magazine, a very large, oversized coffee table type of thing. And but at the international festival held in Kingman this year, who won the bid, I made a presentation, and one of my films was shown there at the film festival. And then I also met another Century family that I was unaware of, and this is what happens to historians. It just never seems to stop sometimes. And they are people that Century family literally means they were here at 1 century, 100 years or longer, and there are some that are living witnesses. And I spoke with actually 3 different people, and 2 connected to this family, and 1 with another family who came later, but they were still here during the 1950s. And so I'll have new additional information to reveal then, because they were all eyewitnesses.
Fascinating. What's your website? How can people reach you?
Website is www.kingmanufocrashes.com. You can find me on Facebook at Harry. You can find me on Facebook at harry.drew. Go ahead.
Harry.drew. Say that again, please.
Harry.drew.35.
Okay, on Facebook.
Yep.
Excellent. All right. Well, anybody, any final comments or questions, Bob or Sasha, for Harry before we let him go?
Harry, thank you. I think this was such a powerful presentation. I don't think anyone is going to be as fooled by the disinformation syndrome that our government has once they look at your evidence.
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to getting it out to where people can have this to look at, and they can actually go check out what I'm saying for themselves and see it's true.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Harry, for coming on our show today. Are you going to be at any conferences this year or next year that people can see you in person?
I think I'm going to be down at a conference coming up. I think it's called StarWorks, and it's November 14, 15, and 16 at Laughlin, Nevada, which is the original, or almost the original, later-day 15-year home site of the International UFO Congress that happened every year with Bob Brown. And Paula Harris is running that this year. Yeah.
Well, we are actually going to be there, and so is Bob, so we'll come up and say hello in person when we're there.
Absolutely. Janet, thank you very much.
We'll meet you. Thank you so much for being on our show today.
Yep. Regards to Bob.
Okay, Bob. And Bob, sorry that Harry couldn't hear you very well today.
Regards to your beautiful wife, Harry.
Yeah.
Yep. And thanks to your listeners.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Aloha. Bob, do you have any final words, any up for our audience before we sign off today?
Well, this gentleman gave a lot of answers to a lot of stuff I've either read or heard over the years. The original Doppler radar was the one that took down the 3 ships around Roswell. That was the same radar that Eisenhower had turned off at Holloman Air Force Base when he first met with them. So, yeah, you guys have always gotten these really nice researchers on this, been giving a lot of good information. The only thing I can say is watch the skies.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, guests. And much love and aloha and blessings from Janet Kira Lesson and Dr. Sasha Lesson and Robert Evans. And Harry said goodbye. Aloha until next week.